What's up? This is Technically Correct with Tyler Bischoff. On today's show, the NBA is finally coming to Vegas. Probably. UNLV's not done playing basketball either. They're going to the NIT, and is it good news, great news, that Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn and Tyron Jones are actually going to play? So I do want to start the show today with the NBA because we got a report from ESPN that NBA owners are likely to vote in favor of NBA expansion this month. However, I guess that's not the official vote, according to ESPN. That's expected to happen sometime in July once the season ends. So they're just going to talk about it and take a straw poll, I guess, to see if everybody's actually on the same page. But it's hard to believe that would get leaked to ESPN if they were not going to expand. Right. I don't think somebody from the NBA is telling Shams Charania, hey, we're probably going to vote in favor of NBA expansion unless they know they're going to vote in favor of NBA expansion. So nothing's official, and apparently nothing will be official until July from the owners themselves. But this is it. This is sort of the report we've been waiting for. I mean, at least since I've been here, which has now been just over a decade, where it seems like every year somebody comes out saying, within the next 5 years, the NBA will be in Vegas. And we get that type of quote every year for a decade. Now it's actually going to be true. And now we're actually going to get an NBA team. So first off, I do want to say I was wrong. I didn't think the NBA was actually going to do expansion to Vegas and Seattle this year, which, by the way, part of the reporting is that Vegas and Seattle are the cities that are going to get teams. I'll get to that in just a second because that's also surprising. But I was wrong. I thought the NBA was going to push off expanding to Las Vegas and Seattle. And I thought that specifically because the NBA is creating a league in Europe. It's not a division of the NBA. It's just its own separate league. They're trying to create a league in Europe. And according to reports, they want to have, it's either 10 or 12 teams and have each team pay $500 million as what's effectively an expansion fee. And so I thought that NBA owners were going to say, well, let's get this NBA Europe thing up and running. We, as the owners of the NBA teams, are going to collect this expansion fee money, which is going to be $10 to $12 billion, and split that up amongst ourselves. We don't need to expand domestically right now. We can wait and do that later, because if you're an NBA owner, really the only benefit of expanding is you get the expansion fee. It's a huge benefit because it's a whole bunch of money, but that's really the only benefit. And so why expand domestically when you're also going to get all these billions of dollars from Europe? But apparently they're going to try to do both at the same time, which, by the way, the reported expansion fees for the NBA teams in Las Vegas and Seattle are going to be between $7 and $10 billion each, which means if you combine what they might get in Europe and what they might get here, we're talking about like $20 to $26 billion in expansion fees that the current 30 owners in the NBA are going to share. Now, those are not all paid at once. Those are usually done on sort of payment plans, payment situations, whatever. So they're not just going to get this 20 to 26 billion right away, but they're going to get 20 to 26 billion dollars in the near future if all of these plans go ahead as planned, as they are sort of projecting them to do. So I didn't think that they were going to do it domestically and European at the same time, but it appears as though they are. Now, part of what I found interesting about the ESPN report basically saying it's going to be Seattle and Las Vegas is that pro sports leagues in the United States love to leverage cities against each other to get more money. We're seeing that right now with the Chicago Bears. They've got like 3 different cities that they're trying to get public money out of, right? Indiana's involved, right? Some city in Iowa was like, hey, we'll give you some money too. The Chiefs are moving across the border. They're moving from Missouri to Kansas because they were leveraging Kansas City, Missouri against Kansas City, Kansas to get as much money as possible. It's something that sports leagues love to do. How do we get money? Well, we make it seem like there's somebody else to bid this up. And so coming out and saying, hey, it's going to be Vegas and Seattle. If they announce expansion in July and say it's Vegas and Seattle, they're not bidding other cities, whether it's Louisville, another domestic city, or whether it's sort of the dream of Mexico City, where they could make a whole bunch of money, but there's a lot of problems, logistically speaking. If they just come out and say Vegas and Seattle, then they're not really leveraging that, which makes me think they've already done the negotiations. They've already figured out, okay, we've talked to the ownership groups, and we've already negotiated that it's going to be 7 or 8 or 9 or $10 billion. And somebody gave that range to Sham Charania that it was going to be between 7 and $10 billion. My guess is they've already negotiated that privately, unofficially, whatever, because otherwise they would want whatever ownership group in Vegas and Seattle to have to bid against an ownership group in Louisville or whatever other city was going to be interested. So it feels like they've already figured out how much the expansion fee is going to be. Or I guess the other possibility is there's enough potential ownership groups in Las Vegas that they can negotiate or use both of them as leverage. Like, hey, we're moving to Vegas. We've got 3 potential ownership groups. Hey, they're going to pay 7. We're going to give it to them. Oh, you'll do 8? Cool. Hey, they're going to do 8. Oh, you'll do 9. So maybe there's enough groups in Vegas that they can leverage against each other. But I would tend to guess if they already know Vegas and they already know Seattle, they already know the ownership groups and they already know the expansion fee, which would make this go rather quickly or as quickly as possible, right? Which, by the way, another detail in this report was that the target date for when these teams would start playing is 2028 and 2029 season. That's not very far away, right? That's very, very close. That's about 2.5 years from now to when these teams would be playing NBA games. And the key for the Las Vegas team is what that means for the arena that they're going to play in. So, one important note for sports franchises in the United States now, or at least in the last decade or two, owners desperately want to own their own stadium or ballpark or arena. It's become one of the biggest pushes when a team is moving out. They do not want to pay rent. They don't want another team or another company or somehow the state or city to own it. They can own it in name, but the team wants to control the revenues and the team wants to have non-athletic events, non-team events at their stadium, ballpark, or arena, right? If you look at the Raiders in Allegiant Stadium, why have the Raiders become a much more valuable franchise, right? The franchise valuations, because they host all these events at Allegiant Stadium, and the Raiders and Mark Davis make money off of that, right? Like that's where you make a whole bunch of extra money. So an NBA team coming to Vegas, you look around Vegas and you say, well, T-Mobile Arena's here. The NBA plays the NBA Cup games there, right? The Aces have played games there. It was built with this NBA locker room ready to go so that it could host an NBA season. T-Mobile Arena can host an NBA team for an entire season. That is not really a question mark, right? But who's going to own the team? Because whoever's going to own the team is probably not going to own T-Mobile Arena, right? Bill Foley owns part of it. MGM owns, I think, the biggest share of it. So unless it's one of those, whoever owns the NBA team doesn't own T-Mobile Arena. So in theory, the way most teams have done it recently is the NBA team's going to get their own arena. They're going to get a brand new arena somewhere. Maybe it's on the Strip. I would guess it's going to be on the Strip because that's where the Golden Knights are. That's where the A's wanted to be. You want the tourist dollars if you're going to put a team in Las Vegas. It's going to be on the Strip somewhere, and they're going to own that own arena. But if the NBA doesn't announce expansion until July, and if they don't come out in July and say, it is Vegas, it is Seattle, these are the ownership groups, that means we're probably pushing into 2027 for when the ownership groups are official. There's no way a new arena is getting built that quickly. So most likely, if they actually start in the 2028-29 season, they're starting out at T-Mobile while another arena is under construction. And then whether it's their second, third, or fourth year, they're moving into a brand new arena relatively quickly. That's what I would expect to happen. Maybe the owners, whoever it's going to be for the team in Vegas, say, we'll be fine not owning our own arena. They'll be different and they won't actually want it and they'll just stay at T-Mobile Arena. But I'd be shocked if that actually happens. One other thing on this, maybe there's more as I talk about it, but one other thing on this that this is just me kind of pondering the future here. The valuations of these sports franchises keep going up and up and up, right? The Lakers just sold for like $10 billion or whatever it was. Does that continue? Because how many people have $7 to $10 billion to buy a franchise in Las Vegas? Right? It's how many groups of people, right? Like you are severely limiting the amount of people that can own a sports franchise when these are the dollar amounts that it costs to buy a team. But why would you buy a team for $10 billion? It's because the valuations keep going up. And 10 years from now, that valuation is going to be $20 billion. You're going to make $10 billion over the course of a decade. It's a great idea. Does it ever stop? Like, where is the peak of sports franchise valuations? It could be $10 billion, right? We could have somebody in Vegas and Seattle buy the teams for $10 billion, and their valuations just never get there, and they plateau or go down a little bit, whatever it is. Or is sports this infallible beast that is not going to see any sort of decline? That we're just going to see growth year after year on these franchise valuations, right? Sports have become huge in terms of money making and revenue and all of that, right? Big part of it is it's like the only thing about live sports is like the only thing we want to watch on real television, right? It's one of the biggest drivers of whether it's TV, streaming, whatever. They want live sports because that's what people are going to watch. And so that causes these television deals to be higher and higher and higher. Maybe it keeps going up and it's I die before a sports franchise value plateaus or goes down. But it's just sort of an interesting thing to think like, damn, we're really talking about $10 billion for an NBA team in Las Vegas. Like, do we really think it's going to be worth $20 billion 10 years from now? I guess so. But the NBA appears to be coming. Now, a couple of things. Is it bad news for the teams in Vegas right now? Somebody asked me on Twitter, I forgot who it was, I'm sorry, if this was bad news for UNLV. I saw somebody from Barstool tweet out that the Golden Knights are never going to be number 2 in this city, basically saying they're never going to fall behind a basketball team. Obviously, the Raiders are here as well, and the Aces. And the A's are coming. So what does the landscape of Las Vegas sports look like? And we'll just say 2030. The A's have started and they've been here for a couple. Because by the way, the A's are going to be here. They're going to have their first season, 2028, and then the NBA team is going to come right afterwards. So I think this hurts the A's because they're not going to have that short time period where, hey, we're brand new. We're the new thing in town. They're going to have that for one season, and then the NBA is here. Like immediately after the A's season ends and it's NBA season, oh my God, we have an NBA team in Vegas, right? So that newness factor for the A's barely exists. They're not even going to be the newest thing in town for a full season, a full year. So it hurts the A's in that regard. The good news for the A's is that schedule-wise, you really only have to worry about the NBA playoffs going head-to-head with A's games, which, you can play all the way into June, but that's going to be hey, when the Vegas team has sort of presumably, they're going to get a star player at some point, and they're going to go on a run where they're having deep playoff runs for 5 straight years. But other years, it's like, oh, they're in the play-in and then they're out. They missed the playoffs. Oh, they made it to the first round and they're out in Game 6. And it won't be that long. So that's not too bad for the A's. I am fascinated to see what it means for the Golden Knights, because the Golden Knights have been unbelievably popular in Las Vegas since they started. But one of the keys there is the Golden Knights have never sucked. The Golden Knights have missed the playoffs in one season. They won the Stanley Cup the very next year. So there has not been any downturn in Golden Knights production or performance. What does the Golden Knights fan base look like if they miss the playoffs for 3 straight years? Because I think the biggest key to take away from anything in Las Vegas sports is that it's going to be about who's winning. I think the Raiders and the NFL are kind of set apart from that because the NFL is so big here and the games are scarce. There's not as many of them compared to the other leagues that it's always going to be a big deal. And even if we as a city don't really adopt the Raiders the same way the Golden Knights have been adopted, or an expansion NBA team will probably be adopted, the NFL is always going to be a big deal. So the Raiders are kind of set aside from this. But if you take the A's, the Golden Knights, and whatever the NBA team is named, and throw UNLV into this as well, whoever is winning is who's going to get the attention and who's going to get the attendance. I don't believe that Las Vegas is going to be, well, this is a hockey town and we care about the Golden Knights even when they miss the playoffs and the NBA team is in the playoffs. I don't think it's going to be, this is a basketball town and we support the NBA and the Golden Knights or whatever. We don't care about it. It's going to be who's the winner. And the biggest example of that is UNLV. UNLV basketball. Obviously, when they were winning a national championship, when Jerry Tarkanian was here, there weren't pro sports, but they were a huge deal, right? But just go back 10, 11, 12 years from now. UNLV was drawing huge crowds to the Thomas and Mack. UNLV was playing in an NBA-sized arena and drawing NBA-sized crowds to games at the Thomas and Mack. And UNLV was not good. I should rephrase that. UNLV was not national championship good. They were going to the NCAA tournament and stuff under Lon Kruger and then a couple of times under Dave Rice. But they were not like, this was not a, oh my God, they're one of the top 10 programs in the country. They were a good program, but it wasn't like they're going to win the national championship. Good. And they were drawing huge crowds. Now, pro sports wasn't here then, so the ceiling for UNLV might be capped a little lower than it used to be. But if UNLV starts winning, if UNLV is a regular NCAA tournament team, if UNLV is a team that you sit back and say, well, yeah, they could go to the Sweet 16. They could get a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. People are going to show up and watch UNLV, even if there's an NBA and an NHL team playing. People are going to watch who is winning. It's why I keep saying with UNLV, they need to play in relevant games, games that matter for the NCAA tournament. It's going to be hard in the new Mountain West, but like they need to play relevant games because that's what people are going to care about. Get ranked, get a little number next to your name. Be in the bracketology where it's like, oh, we're a 5 seed going into February 14th, right? Like that's what you need. And people are going to show up even if there's pro sports and you're playing in those games consistently. And I think the same is going to be true of the Golden Knights and the NBA team. One built-in benefit for pro sports teams, you're playing other professional sports teams. So there's always going to be some desire, even if the Golden Knights or the NBA team are bad, there's still a, hey, we can go watch the other team. We can go watch the stars of the other team because they're the best in the world at this. In college basketball for UNLV, that's not going to exist because they're going to be in the Mountain West and it's going to be like, oh, UNLV's not good. Who are they playing? Wyoming is also not good, so it hurts them there. But I think if we have a 3-year stretch where the Golden Knights miss the playoffs all 3 years and the NBA team is a conference finalist, right? Maybe they win a title, maybe they don't, but they're one of the Final Four teams playing a couple of years in a row. We're going to look around and say, oh, this is a basketball town and not a hockey town. And it'll be I think this is all going to be about winning. I don't think this city is just, yep, it's a Golden Knights town. It's a Golden Knights town now because we've had almost a full decade of no losing. Right? It's been a full decade of like, yeah, of course they're in the playoffs. Like they're more likely to go to the Stanley Cup final than they are to miss the playoffs. Of course it's a Golden Knights town. What happens if they go on a Buffalo Sabres type run? Is it still a Golden Knights town then? Probably not. We just saw what happened to UNLV. Fell off the face of the earth. Is that going to happen to the Golden Knights? I think it will if they're that bad. I don't think they'll be that bad that long. It's hard to be as bad as the Sabres were. It's hard to miss the playoffs like 4 straight years, let alone what, Sabres won on a decade or something. But I just think it's going to be about winning. The Raiders in the NFL are going to exist. They're going to be super popular because it's the NFL. But everything else is going to be based on winning. And if we have a run where the NBA and the NHL team don't make the playoffs for 5 straight years, and UNLV goes to 5 straight NCAA tournaments and goes to the Sweet 16 a couple of times, we're going to look and say, oh my God, it's a UNLV town. So that's what it is. One last thing on it, because Josh Pastner mentioned this when he got asked about the NBA coming. He mentioned helping in recruiting. It's not. It's not. And the NBA team is not going to help in recruiting. First off, the NBA is already here. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn talked about how he saw Bam Adebayo during the summer. So like, there's not going to be a world where it's like, yeah, come to UNLV. Oh, there's an NBA team here. That's cool. That's not going to help in recruiting. Now, on UNLV, they're still playing basketball. They are in the NIT. They play UC Irvine tonight. Tonight is Tuesday. And the biggest news, Dre Gibbs Lawhorn and Tyron Jones are going to play for UNLV. Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, after they got eliminated in the Mountain West tournament, he said that he wanted to keep playing. Josh Pastner, when he talked to the media on Monday, he said that everyone wanted to play and said it wasn't even a question if they would play or not. So this team, granted, we've only talked to Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, but since they got the NIT berth, but it appears as though this team is excited to play in the NIT. And Tyron Jones and Dre Gibbs Lawhorn are two players that we expect to go into the transfer portal, or at least consider going into the transfer portal, because they would, in theory, be getting good offers from better programs, higher paying offers from programs to transfer out of UNLV. But they're playing in the NIT, which you can take as good news, right? Obviously, it would be bad news if Dre Gibbs Lawhorn or Tyron Jones says, no, I'm not playing in the NIT. That would basically be them saying, I'm leaving UNLV, I'm not coming back. But them playing is at least opening the door to them returning. Now, there is a key change in college basketball. The transfer portal does not open until after the national championship game is played. It's the day after. So what that means is for Dre Gibbs Lawhorn and Tyron Jones, they can play the entirety of the NIT and not even have to worry about the transfer portal until they're done. They could lose to UC Irvine and it's one day, but they could win the NIT and don't have to think about the transfer portal at all because it doesn't open until after the season actually ends. That was not true the last 2 years. March 14th was the date the transfer portal opened 2 years ago, right? Dre Gibbs Lawhorn could have already been in the transfer portal if this was 2 years ago. It was March 20-something last year. So because of that change, it means you can play in the NIT and fully intend to transfer, but you can play in the entire NIT and then transfer. Now, you're still running the risk of injury, right? If Dre Gibbs Lawhorn suffers a serious injury, that's going to severely limit what his transfer portal options are. So that is still a possibility. And we're not idiots. Coaches are going to be reaching out to players they want to see in the transfer portal. They're going to be reaching out to their agents or whoever, but they're going to be reaching out to a player like Dre Gibbs Lawhorn to be like, hey, if you go in the portal, this SEC school, this Big Ten school, whoever, we're going to make this type of offer to you, right? That's going to happen before the portal opens. We all know that's going to happen before the portal opens. So when I say you can just not think about the transfer portal, probably not realistic, but it is probable there. So the point there is that Dre Gibbs Lawhorn and Tyron Jones playing in the NIT doesn't mean they're coming back. It just means we don't know if they're leaving yet or not. Now, they're playing UC Irvine in the NIT. 105 in Ken Palm. UNLV's 107, by the way. But they're a fascinating team, UC Irvine. They finished 25th in defensive efficiency this season by Ken Palm rankings. They have one of the best shot blockers in the country in Kyle Evans. Opponents this year shot 42.7% on two-pointers against UC Irvine. That's the lowest mark in the country. Yes, they played in a weak conference, but this is a legitimately good defensive team. Ken Palm defensive efficiency, where they're 25th, that is strength of schedule adjusted. So this is a really, really good defensive team. However, they're horrendous on offense. 255th in offensive efficiency. They don't shoot a lot of threes. They don't make a very high percentage. They don't shoot well from inside the arc either. They turn the ball over a decent amount, and they don't get the free throw line very often. They're bad on offense. In fact, the only Mountain West team that had a worse offensive efficiency than UC Irvine this year was Air Force, who was one of the worst teams in the country, right? On the flip side, only two Mountain West teams had a higher defensive efficiency with San Diego State and Grand Canyon. Very, very weird team. So we'll see how that actually plays out. UNLV, obviously, a better offensive team than defensive team, but their split's not nearly as drastic. UNLV was not the 25th best offense and the 250th best defense. They were more like 80th and 100-something, 150 or 60 on defense. So still a pretty big split, but not as big as what UC Irvine is. One interesting part about the NIT is that there are 5 Mountain West teams in it: Nevada, New Mexico, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado State, Wyoming, and UNLV. are all in the NIT. Um, Also, if you take notes there, all but one of those teams are actually staying in the NIT. Colorado State is going to the Pac-12. So teams that were in or will be in the Mountain West in the future are playing in this, which I put out this stat because I went and looked it up and it took me enough time to justify tweeting it. But Mountain West championships in football and men's basketball were both won this season by teams that are leaving the conference, right? And in fact, their Mountain West has given out 10 conference championships this year. 7 of the 10 in all sports have been won by programs that are leaving the Mountain West. New Mexico won cross country men's and women's. That was like the big notable one for somebody that's staying. But over the last 10 seasons, if we just look at men's basketball and football, over the last 10 seasons, 17 of the 20 champions have been from schools that are leaving the Mountain West. We've known the best programs are leaving, right? But that really is a stark number to me that in the last 10 years, only 3 of the teams staying have a championship in football or men's basketball. Obviously, UNLV was very close. They lost 3 straight Mountain West football championships. It happens. But most of the teams that win championships are leaving. What does this conference look like next year? It's already a one big conference this year with San Diego State, with Colorado State still in it. What does it look like next year? It's hard to imagine it being a multi-bid conference, right? Like what 2 programs are going to be good enough to get at larges? Basically, what 2 programs are going to be significantly better than they were this season next year? Can New Mexico and Grand Canyon do it? Does Josh Pastner have a monster second year? Right? Like it's possible, it's plausible, but I think if you're looking at this realistically, Grand Canyon, New Mexico, and then Nevada and UNLV. Those are probably your 4, and you could probably split them into those tiers where it's New Mexico, Grand Canyon, and then Nevada, UNLV. As to, all right, can you put together an at-large worthy team? Yes. I think all 4 of those programs could. Are 2 of them going to do it in the same season? Probably not. And that's going to be the issue is you might have one every single year. And by the way, you might have years where none of them put together an at-large team. And you're not only a one-bid conference, you're a one-bid conference where your conference champion is a 13 seed, right? It's pretty brutal. So what does the Mountain West look like going forward? Not great. And it's not breaking news, but it was really put into, now that the Mountain West basketball season is over, it really got like put into context for me how much they're losing with all of these teams leaving the Mountain West. Last thing for you. If you didn't see it, Josh Pastner loves me very, very much. He says he disagrees with me, but he respects my grind, which, thank you, Josh. I don't even think I grind that hard, but Josh Pastner recognizes it. One thing I want to say that I like about Josh Pastner, that has nothing to do with, like, as a fan, you should not care about this like 90% of the time. It's probably important every now and then for your coach's likability, but 90% of the time this doesn't matter. But as a media member, one of the things that I really, really like about Josh Pastner is he understands what the media's job is. He understands what we need from him, why he's doing the press conferences, and not one time has he ever shown some element of I'm better than you because I'm the basketball coach and you're the media member, which sometimes can be justified. I'm not saying every time a coach does that, they're not justified in doing it, but it's annoying, and it happens quite a bit in sports. But Josh Pastner, honestly, he makes it seem like media opinions are just as valid as his, which they shouldn't be, but he's more likely to make you think that than that he has a better opinion than the media. So I also appreciate that. And I'll give you a story that's not Pastner related, but it's the first time where I dealt with a coach where it was like, oh, they're actually understanding of what the media is doing. And I was spoiled. My first year of covering a college basketball team was when I was in college. It was for the student newspaper at Ole Miss. And by the way, we published 5 times a day. We weren't some crappy student newspaper that did like 1 edition a week. No, 5 days a week. And I wrote during the summer too. But I covered Ole Miss basketball. Went to all the home games, all the practices. covered the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, Kansas City that year. But I was spoiled that year because Marshall Henderson was on that team. If you don't know anything about Marshall Henderson, Google him. You're going to enjoy some great highlights there. They also had power forward named Murphy Holloway, who's like still to this day one of the best college basketball athletes that I've like talking to the media wise. And then the head coach was Andy Kennedy. And here's what happened to me that like I really respect Andy Kennedy and any coach who does anything like this. Ole Miss was playing Kentucky at home. I think both teams were ranked. It was a big game. And my editor asked me, hey, can you write 2 stories from that game? Now, it's a weekday game. I can't remember the exact times, but let's say it tipped off at 7 p.m. And our deadline is, to get it into the student newspaper was 10 p.m. or something like that. So basically, there's going to be like an hour or less from when the game ends to getting these stories in. Writing 2 stories in that short amount of time is going to be quite difficult. So to get these 2 stories in, I pre-wrote a story because Murphy Holloway was like 4 rebounds away from getting 1,000 rebounds in his career. And he was going to be one of just a few players with 1,000 points and 1,000 rebounds in Ole Miss history. So I basically pre-wrote a story, about 75% of this story, about Murphy Holloway eclipsing this career mark in rebounds. And he got it in the game, and it was like, all right, I'll add some quotes afterwards, maybe some specific details from that game, but that way I'll have one of the 2 stories pretty much done. Ole Miss plays Kentucky. I've got this story pretty much written out. They lose the game, which is disaster for me because getting quotes after the game in a win, a lot easier than a loss. So they lose the game. Murphy Holloway comes out and talks to the media, and I ask him like, hey, you got 1,000 rebounds, what does that mean to you? Probably phrased it really poorly. And he gave, it wasn't a bad answer, it was still usable, but he gave an answer that was like, oh, we lost the game, nothing else matters, which is a boring quote, right? It's not a great quote. But the thing that I really appreciated from that entire thing is Andy Kennedy, the head coach. They lose this game, big game to Kentucky. Post-game press conference, I ask him, Murphy Holloway got 1,000 rebounds. Like, what has Murphy Holloway's career been like to you? And he looks at me it was probably a second or 2, but it felt like 5 or 6 seconds. And he looks at me initially with a facial expression of like, who cares, right? But then composes himself and gives me an incredible answer about Murphy Holloway, who he was as a person, what his career has been, and all of this, right? Great answer, was a perfect quote for the story I had written. And that was like the first time me realizing, oh, the coach understands what we're doing as the media. And I will not say bad things about Andy Kennedy. If Ole Miss hires him, if UNLV hires him, I'm going to have some trouble actually talking about it because I love Andy Kennedy. That's a big reason why. And Pastner not giving me anything that's quite that level, but Pastner is in that same ilk of he understands what the media needs to do or what they're supposed to do and helps them out and never really like Andy Kennedy would belittle you, but never really belittles you or anything like that. And I genuinely appreciate that from a coach. I'm still going to tell you when he sucks. I'm still going to tell you, okay, year 2, they're 107th in KenPom. He's not going to work out, right? We're still going to have those conversations, but I do really appreciate that from Josh Pastner because not all coaches do that.